Next game up is one that, I'm not a gloating kind of guy, but I checked the tape again today, and it did have me saying that Arkansas would beat Florida. Nowhere in there, I was very smart about this. Nowhere in there did I mention that it would or would not be a 31-10 game. So I'll just take the win and shut up about it. But Arkansas really surprised some people, and I think what we saw in this game, 31-10 for Arkansas, was a lot of what we've been saying all year for both of these teams, where we saw some stuff we expected. Arkansas's coming off of a bye week that they needed probably more than anybody else in the country, not only to get healthy physically, but mentally as well, because they were having to get up for games 4 or 5 in a row. But what was pretty shocking in this game was the fact that either Arkansas found a defense magically in that week off, or Florida found the same offense that they've deployed a few games this year, like against Vanderbilt. 241 yards total for Florida, 229 of that through the air. They had 12 yards rushing on 14 attempts. Y'all, that's less than 1 yard an attempt. Not even a lot of turnovers for them, but they couldn't hang on to the ball. The one turnover that they did have, they had 2, but the one killer was the first play of the game, pick 6. They were 1 of 11 for third down. And I want you to put this into perspective, because we've talked all year about how bad Arkansas's defense is, and we've upset some Arkansas fans by not being high on them after a win. And I'm going to continue that. Arkansas fans, everybody that watches Arkansas football, don't expect this kind of performance every week, because you're not going to be playing Florida's offense every week. So speak to that before we get into the guts of this game, about how historically bad of an offensive performance this was for Florida, given the type of numbers that Arkansas has had defensively throughout the year.
It's kind of mind-boggling. We talked about this game, and we said, well, we could see it being close. One of the things we really pegged was, the Florida pass defense, and how they were inconsistent, even though they were good. We can get to that later. But what we both agreed on was the fact that Florida should be able to run the football, right? That Arkansas's struggled all year in run defense. And if you can't, defend the run, it's hard to win football games against good teams. Then what happens? Florida comes out and has 12 yards rushing.
12, y'all.
12
Not on one carry, just 12.
total. They that other game that everybody's talking about, and Fournette and the defensive struggle. Yeah, they got some yards in that game. I mean, Texas State had more yards rushing in a 42-3 loss than Florida did. Now, the flip side to that was Florida only ran the ball 14 times. Now, I understand you don't run it a lot when you're struggling to run it, and you don't want to, just punt the ball because you're running it and going 3 and out every time. But when you don't ever try to establish the run, it's hard to get a lot of yards. If you look at, like Florida's first drive, where they go, well, the first drive after the pick 6, they come out passing again, right? Throw a pick 6 in the first play, get a kickoff. Then they pass again to Callaway. Then they run for 9 yards. All right. Now, remember, they only had 12 yards rushing. So the first carry of the game is 9 of the 12 yards they get. They throw another pass, run for 4 yards. All right. They're at 13 yards rushing, already ahead of where they will finish. Throwing, and then, it's second, first and 10, incomplete pass. Second and 10, 4-yard run. Third and 6, incomplete pass. So in the first 6 plays, they've thrown 4 passes, completed 1, and thrown a pick 6. In the first 6 plays, they've run twice, and they've averaged 7 yards per carry. Second drive, they try to establish it. They have a complete pass, get a first down, run, pass. Run for a loss, run for a yard, and then pass for a yard, punt the ball again. And at this point, they just get in a rut, get the ball back. What do? 3 straight passes. incomplete pass, 3 yard pass. Punt the ball, get it back. They have a 3 yard run, 3 yard run for a loss of 4, pass, another interception. Punt again. Like what happens? Well, they have a they have a mildly successful 2 yard run, take a 12 yard sack. Uh, then they managed to get a 20 yard 1 yard run, but have to punt because they were in 3rd and 24. I
Just
know this is kind of boring for
real
me to.
quick on that because this is fascinating. Mark Thompson had that 21-yard run. He had that 21-yard run. Let me say it again. He had that 21-yard run. He finished with 19 yards for the game.
Yeah, but he only had 3 carries, right?
Exactly.
And you can step through it, and we talked about those 14 rushes. Well, 3 of those rushes, quote unquote, were sacks by Luke Del Rio for negative 25 yards. So they weren't just sacks; they were huge sacks. He was taking 10 yard sacks, and you shouldn't be that deep in the pocket to start with. And then the rest of the guys, the backs, they only had 11 touches to between P. Ryan, Scarlett, and Thompson. And Arkansas again, their run defense has absolutely struggled all year. And I know they come off, they're more rested, they play better. I get all that, but Arkansas has given up 6.42 yards per carry. Does it really make sense to have 40 between the sacks and the actual pass attempts? 40 pass plays, 11 run plays. 4-to-1 pass to run ratio that Florida ran in that ball game against what is far and away the worst rush defense in the conference. I mean, not only that, it's the worst run defense in the country per carry average, and they passed to run 4-to-1. Thompson averaged, I know we said there's just one run for 21 yards, but he still had a 6.3 yard per carry average. Scarlett only had 5 carries. Yeah, he only had 15 yards, but he only had 5 carries. P. Ryan only got 3 carries in the ball game. And, maybe if you establish the run a little bit at some point, it'll work. But, it just, I don't know. I am just blown away, baffled. I have never been a fan of Doug Nussmeier. There's a couple of coordinators you can sort of follow their history and sort of track the failure. One is Leffler. Where did he first really come into play? Well, he was at Michigan when they were sort of in their death throes, and he was a well-regarded quarterback guru because he had brought up this guy named Tom Brady when he was at Michigan years ago. If my memory serves. So he interviewed at Alabama, ends up being hired as the offensive coordinator at Auburn. That year was 2012, the year that Gus Malzahn left. And what do we know about Auburn's offense in 2012?
Wasn't good.
Yeah, where that staff gets fired. Where does Leffler go? Well, he goes to Virginia Tech. Frank Beamer hires him. And what happens to Virginia Tech's offense in the next 2 years?
Wasn't good.
Wasn't good. And Beamer gets fired.
So you think Nuss is the same way?
It's possible. I mean, Nussmeier really, he had a good offense when he was at Washington in 2009 through 2011, but he came to Alabama, in that 2012 season to the Alabama wins the national championship. Everybody sort of knows that, but lest we forget, Alabama lost to Texas A&M that year. And why did they lose to Texas A&M? Because they couldn't score. Yeah, it just again though. I mean, like I'm pulling up right now. Michigan Wolverines, Doug Nussmeier when he gets fired. They lost to Utah 26-10, lose to Minnesota 30-14. They lose to Michigan State 35-11. Beat Northwestern 10-9. Lost to Notre Dame 31-0. There's a lot of low-scoring ball games. So there's going to be why am I saying all this? I'm not trying to have a huge rant. I'm just trying to talk
Well,
about.
you kind of did. So.
Yeah, well, okay, I did. But I think it's justified, right? There's a lot of things you can track that get put on head coaches that sometimes it's the coordinators. And Nussmeier has a track record, frankly, of failure. And he's always been a lot West Coast. He always has these simple crossing routes, kind of does the bubble screen, doesn't commit to it, not a lot of rhythm. There's no sophistication in the downfield passing game. It's mostly just about crossing routes and drags, screens underneath, mixed with random runs. Often loses balance in the ball game. And I personally think that a lot of what we're seeing right now at Florida is Doug Nussmeier. Jim McElwain needs to realize he has to go in a different direction. I know considers Nussmeier a friend. I think Nussmeier is a seriously bad hire. And if they replace him, I think you could see a major uptick in Florida's production because I don't think Nussmeier's the guy. And I will tell one anecdote before I finish my what has become a lengthy rant here. Nussmeier in the 2012 SEC championship game, I have been told, was in the booth calling plays where Alabama was in a shootout with Georgia. And after one play he called that wasn't very popular, he put his hands on his head, looks around, and goes, "Well, that's my job." He was convinced he was going to be fired, and it's because Saban wasn't real happy with him and his ability to consistently call offensive plays. Obviously, 2013 they kind of stumble at the end of the season, and I'm fully convinced he was encouraged to look for other options, and that's what led to Lane Kiffin. And as much as Lane Kiffin's been very good at Alabama, I think you also now have to question: was Kiffin that good, or was Nussmeier just holding them back that much in the years prior? Anyway, I'll finish my rant, but there you go.
Yeah, it's interesting the language that Saban used when Nussmeier parted ways with them in Tuscaloosa was in typical Saban fashion. He's not going to trash the guy. He's not going to kick him on the way out. But you could tell in the language that Saban used, it wasn't flowery. Which, if you know anything about Nick Saban, yeah, he's kind of a jerk. But in terms of inside the walls of the profession, like he's a jerk to reporters. He's not a jerk to coaches. He is, and he's not a jerk to players. So, save the one in Miami that would probably disagree with me. But for him to be as, I don't know, dry and terse and not have a lot of language around that exit, I agree with you. I think everybody feels like he was shown the door, and he was probably shown the door angrily behind closed doors. So, flipping over to the other side, talking about Arkansas a little bit, Austin Allen kind of came back around 9.3 yards per. The pick six he threw was absolutely terrible and absolutely not like him, so I'll give him a pass on that. But what was really surprising to me was Whaley and Williams running the ball. Both had a good bit of success, especially Raleigh Williams at 5.7 yards per carry. And given the numbers that this Florida defense has put up historically and even this year, this is shocking because Arkansas doesn't stop the run. They stop the run, mostly because Florida stopped themselves. But then Arkansas doesn't run it very well. And this is the one that you can't explain away, I think, with a coordinator or a play calling. This one is really a head scratcher and might speak to the fact that Arkansas is maybe getting their legs under them, or is Florida that bad on that side of the ball and we didn't know it?
Well, I think the first thing you have to acknowledge is the injuries, right? I mean, they lose two linebackers in the game. The defensive line's already banged up. I'm not sure that this really is the same Florida run defense that we saw early in the season. We talked about repeatedly, right, that there were three teams in the SEC that were holding teams to under 3.5 yards per carry: Alabama, LSU, and Florida. And two of those teams clearly have great run defenses, and we feel that way after Saturday, and one of them does not. Now, when you lose two, key linebackers, it hurts you. When you lose linemen, it hurts you. But it's hard to say, right? We've seen this before, where you think that Florida is going to be pretty good. They did this last year. The defense was great, and then the end of the season, like the Florida State game, they just get run over. And you kind of go, where did that come from? What happened to this defense? And they get in the they play in the bowl game against Michigan, and they get run over. So, I don't know, but the fact that Brantley's been hurt, Cox has been hurt, Ivy's been hurt, Sherritt's been hurt. In this game, they lose Evans, they lose Anzalone. I don't know. It may well be that there's just, much like Tennessee, they've suffered injuries, and every time you suffer an injury, sometimes it's not a big deal because you have a good backup. Sometimes you don't have a good backup, and it may just be that Florida's depth has given out, and even some of the guys playing, are not anywhere near 100%. Maybe they're just playing because the guys behind them are terrible. Uh, I don't know. It could also be that Arkansas, is rebounding, getting better. I'm going to try to be a little more positive than I sometimes am in these, but the bye week may have been a big deal for Arkansas. May have helped them shore up a lot of issues with their offensive line. They certainly had a lot more holes. But I have a hard time seeing that line that didn't generate push against anybody for the rest of the year suddenly just becoming dominant overnight. I think that's an indication that Florida has issues. I'm stubborn in these situations where you see a strong pattern from one team, in this case Arkansas, struggling to run the ball, and it suddenly turns out positive. My takeaway if I'm an Arkansas fan is less that the run game went really well. While that is very encouraging, and it ran a lot better right against Ole Miss, who'd had a pretty good run defense, but now looks poor too. My takeaway positive is Florida had a great secondary. We've talked a lot about the fact that their secondary will blanket coverage 3 receivers and let the 4th one go open for a touchdown, and they've done that all year with really bad miscommunication. Another aside, if you want to talk about coordinators, you can mention Jeff Collins in that conversation, because at Mississippi State, they were very similar before he went to Florida, that they had really good statistics, but if you went back and looked at their games, they lost a lot of games because they gave up a lot of big plays. But Austin Allen is the reason Arkansas is where they're at. Austin Allen threw for 9.3 yards per against one of supposedly the best pass defenses in the country. And it's that passing game that will make Arkansas dangerous and does make them dangerous and will give them a chance to, beat LSU this coming weekend and, potentially win out against Mississippi State and Mizzou and have what will be a shocking almost 9-3 season given their preseason expectations.
So, and for those of y'all listening to this show, usually in our preview or our review show, we talk a little bit about where people line up in the SEC East or West race and the rest of their schedule. We're going to get into that actually in our preview show for this week, so you haven't heard a lot about that. Plus, we had to carve out a little room for Husky's 15-minute rant about all the coordinators he hates. So, Florida, Arkansas, that was a really weird game for me. Even picking Arkansas, I didn't expect that kind of game, especially with a team in Florida who has so much to play for, right? I mean, Florida had and still has to an extent, the East to play for, but they were on that cusp in the CFP rankings and a place to go, which was up, and they really, really blew it.